Hey guys, Boss and Ramos, and this Friday night, the Miami Dolphins will be concluding their preseason football, their third and final installment for this preseason, and it is on the road against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another Sunshine State rival of the Dolphins. Dolphins so far are 2-0 in the preseason. Tampa Bay Buccaneers 1-1. I know it's preseason, but it is what it is. Game kicks off at 7:30 this Friday night. I'm gonna go over the gambling odds, but I don't advise to gamble on preseason football. It's very volatile. It's pretty ill gains. But yeah, over under set at 37.5. Tampa Bay is favored by 3. And then in terms of money line, Tampa Bay is favored minus 165. And then Miami Dolphins plus 140. Yeah, this is the one and only home game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in terms of preseason play, mostly due to the fact that they are an NFC team, and NFC teams are getting an extra game at home this season, and it's going to be alternating every year. So next year, Dolphins will have one preseason game, but have an extra regular season game at home. Moving forward, there's been talks of the NFL expanding to 18-week season, 18-game season, and it's going to be interesting whether or not they decide to have one neutral site game clause in the new agreement, mostly, and whether those games are going to be those international games like the London games, now Germany games that they're having every year now, it seems, Mexico, wherever it may be, and even sometimes like in places like San Antonio, places that doesn't have an NFL franchise. Like now, I think that would be interesting to see if they do this, at least one guaranteed neutral site game for each team. But that being said, let's talk about this matchup. This is the first and only of the preseason of a preview for the games. And that's mostly, in fact, because Dolphins have had joint practices with all their preseason opponents. So it's been very volatile in terms of predicting who won't be playing in games. Like Tua starting last week was a complete surprise to me, especially since they had a full-on joint practice with the Washington Commanders last week. But hey, he went out there, he did good, so I was happy to see that. I don't expect him to play this week, especially being the third and final preseason game. This is where we're talking about guys who are going to be bubble players and guys, fighting for a roster spot, which we're going to really dive into, because otherwise it's kind of, throwing things up in the air and throwing things at the wall and seeing if it sticks, if you know what I'm saying. But it's more so just, this is really a talent evaluation game for both teams, all teams across the NFL, whoever is playing in this week 3 of the preseason. They're all just evaluating guys. But yeah, this week the Miami Dolphins did have joint practices at Tampa Bay. So that was some interesting stuff to see coming out of there. Excuse the video if you think that it's more homered towards the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tried finding the best footage I can, and a lot of it was in favor of Tampa Bay, mostly because the camp was, the practice was at Tampa Bay. But moving forward, I want to talk about the depth chart, guys on the bubble, guys who are going to be borderline guys who can make the team. So I'm just going to rattle off some names of guys who I think are fringe roster players. So, for example, like Willie Snead, Braylon Sanders, and Anthony Schwartz, Eric Uzama. Like the wide receivers spots are going to be interesting to see down the road of who can make the cut. I think Malik Washington is going to make the cut. We drafted him this past draft. Mike Harley Jr., guy threatening to be cut. Same thing with Carrick McGowan and Jaquan Burton. I think these guys are in a dangerous spot in terms of, making the final roster. I do think the Dolphins are going to carry a lot of wide receivers into the regular season. Also, got to mention Odell Beckham, kind of been AWOL, but he's going to be on the roster. So those are guys that I can tell you right now. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, probably Braxton Berrios and River Craycraft. I would pencil those guys in. Malik Washington, pencil him in as making the roster. So it really leaves Willie Snead, Anthony Schwartz. I would probably say Eric Uzama is going to make the roster as well. So it really leaves maybe one wide receiver spot open, if that. So interesting to see if any of these guys climb up the boards. Eric Uzama definitely had a good preseason game against the Washington Commanders. Moving on to the running back position, that's another area that's going to be interesting. Dolphins have 5 running backs, and honestly, they're all pretty decent in their own right. Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and probably Jeff Wilson are locks to make the roster. I would also include Jalen Redd in that fact, 3rd-round pick, so he's definitely has a right-of-way passage to making the roster. Chris Brooks is going to be interesting. He got a little banged up there at the end of the last preseason game, so let's see what happens with him. I love Chris Brooks. I think he brings kind of like a bruising speed factor. It's a very like hybrid type of player. Interesting to see. So rooting for him to make the roster, but there's only 53 spots, so it's going to be tough. Okay. Offensive line, offensive starters are pretty much slated. Teron Armstead, Robert Jones, Aaron Brewer, Liam Eichenberg, and Austin Jackson. Now, the backup's going to be interesting, but Patrick Paul, I can pretty much guarantee him a spot. Kendall Lamb, guarantee him a spot. Maybe Andrew Meyer, and maybe Matthew Jones. Guys like Jack Driscoll, Ryan Hayes, Chasen Hines, Sean Harlow, Lester Cotton, and Byron Matos. Those are guys that are going to be fighting to make this Miami Dolphins roster, so that will be interesting to see. Last but not least, on the tight end spot, Durham Smythe is listed as the #1 tight end, but you also have Jonnu Smith, Julian Hill, Jordy Fortson, Tanner Connor, and Hayden Rucci. So I think Durham Smythe, Jonnu Smith, those are the 2 guarantees, and then I think they're going to carry a 3rd into the roster, and then try to have guys on the practice squad. It's right now it's a toss-up between Julian Hill and Jordy Fortson. Fortson had some pretty good plays in the first preseason game. Julian Hill had a few good ones in the Commanders. So Tanner Connor, Hayden Rucci, those are guys that are really, trying to fight for a spot here. In terms of quarterback, you already know Tua is the starting quarterback after getting paid big time. In the depth chart, currently Mike White is listed as a 2nd QB, but Skylar Thompson has been getting the more 2nd team reps. So that's interesting to see what happens here. I would be interested to see who starts or who plays first between those 2. I don't think either one of them is going to get cut. I think they're going to carry 3 quarterbacks into the roster. But let's say I do go with Mike White as the backup, mostly because of money. We're going to see what happens with Skylar Thompson, whether or not the Dolphins release him and try to bring him back onto the practice squad. I think they will keep him on the roster, but it's just too hard to tell. Now we're going to move to the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to just run through all the starters, all the guys who I would the first stringers, pretty much guarantee them having a spot. So Zach Steeler and Benito Jones in the defensive tackle slot. Also Calais Campbell you can add in there. Outside linebackers, we have Jalen Phillips and Emmanuel Agba right now, but Agba is taking in Bradley Chubb's spot. But moving forward, we also have David Long Jr. and Jordan Brooks as the starting linebackers. Cornerbacks, we have Jalen Ramsey and Kendall Fuller. Nickel corner, Kader Kohu, Javon Holland, and Jordan Porter locking up the safety spots. Now, the 2nd string guys, interesting to see what happens here, but in the terms of defensive tackle, we have Jonathan Harris, Brandon Peely, Deshaun Hand. Then moving down more, we have Neville Gilmore, Isaiah Mack, and then Leonard Payne. Peely made a big-time play last game. Deshaun Hand was pretty good for the Dolphins down the stretch in the end of the season last year. Jonathan Harris, not too much about him, but Neville Gilmore, a guy that the Dolphins signed in the offseason. Isaiah Mack and Leonard Payne may have to make some big-time plays to try to make a spot in this final roster. Quentin Bell, now we're moving outside linebacker spots. We have Quentin Bell, Wyatt Ray, David Arena, and then on the other side, Chop Robinson, Bo Kamara. Chop Robinson, Bo Kamara, you can pretty much lock in their spots. Quentin Bell, Wyatt Ray, and David Arena are going to be fighting for spots there. And then going back to the linebackers, I think all these linebackers are going to make their spots between, obviously, David Long and Jordan Brooks. We also have Anthony Walker Jr., Duke Riley, and Channing Tindall. Anthony Walker Jr. just signed in the offseason. Duke Riley coming back again with the Miami Dolphins, and Channing Tindall, of previous draftee of the Dolphins. Channing Tindall made some pretty interesting plays, but need to see more out of him if he wants to make the roster. And also Curtis Bolton, tough spot for him. I don't think he ends up on the Miami Dolphins roster. Moving forward to the cornerback spots, we have Cam Smith, Ethan Bonner, Nick Needham, Storm Duck, Sirianni Neal, Jason Mateer, and Isaiah Johnson. Between all those guys, Cam Smith pretty much going to guarantee him a spot. Ethan Bonner has been getting nothing but love this training camp, so I would assume he's going to make the 53-man roster. Same thing with Nick Needham. And then we get to Sirianni Neal. I think he's going to stay locked in because he's a big special teams guy. Interesting to see what's going to happen now with this new kickoff format, but we'll just have to wait and see. But Storm Duck, Jason McIntyre, and Mateer and Isaiah Johnson, guys who are fringe to make the 53 roster. Safeties already went to Jordan Porter and Javon Holland. We also have Elijah Campbell, Marcus May, Patrick McMorris, Jordan Colbert, and Mark Perry. I would say Marcus May and Elijah Campbell definitely have guaranteed spots. It's more so now about these undrafted guys like Mark Perry, Jordan Colbert, if they can crack the roster. And Patrick McMorris, he was drafted, so I would assume he's staying on the roster. Last but not least, we have the special teams. Jason Sanders, Jake Bailey. No competitions there in those positions, so we'll just have to wait and see. And then obviously Blake Ferguson, the long snapper. Aside from that, that's pretty much what to look forward to. Just what guys are fringe and who is going to be making a big push to ending up on this Miami Dolphins 53-man roster, because that's going to come within the next week, and it's going to be tough. The cuts are going to be tough. It's going to be tough seeing some guys leave. One of the things that I reminisce a lot about when it comes to training camp and start of the NFL season is watching Hard Knocks on HBO and seeing all these guys who are hopeful to make the roster either getting cut or making the roster. It's a very type of emotional thing for these guys, and I can't blame them, because this is like the difference of, one, a lot of money, two, saying that you were on a NFL roster. So interesting to see, but yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and yeah, we'll circle back and I will kind of do a deep dive on the performance and who I thought stood out, who really made a push to make themselves get a spot on this roster. But yeah, a lot of decisions for Mike McDaniels and company to whittle down this roster to 53 guys. So stay tuned for that on the post-game video that will be coming out either right after, shortly after the game, or if not, it will be coming out the next day. So just stay locked in on that. And yeah, week 0 of college football. Let me know what you guys are thinking. Yeah, let's hope FSU doesn't win. Just throwing it out there, guys. Anyways, catch you guys on the next one. Peace.